So welcome back. It's Contracts Class 4. We will be today going over, we'll sort of be cleaning up our last moments of consideration, largely in the recap. We've moved on to reliance and some of our other theories. I'll give you a brief historical breakdown on reliance, where it came from and what it's doing. And then we will launch into the cases. We'll start with D&G Bacardi. We've sort of already done Ricketts versus Scawthorne. We'll start with D&G Bacardi and then move through the rest of the reliance cases and into restitution. As usual, I'll do a brief introduction to kind of warm up the circuits. Then you get to ask me any question you've got about the class, up to and including, hey, I didn't understand what you were saying here at all. Could you just please explain it using far fewer words? And I will be happy to do that as well. That's full participation for simply just asking, hey, what do we do here? And then we'll get into the rest of the class. I don't think there's any administrivia today, so let's more or less get started. We are starting with contract formation. To form a contract, as we will begin to see, you need offer, acceptance, and consideration. Offer and acceptance are sort of details. Consideration is what sets apart a bargain for exchange from everything else. And therefore, in our opening chapters about what is a contract, we have focused on the doctrine of consideration. In looking at consideration, we then began to see two things that aren't quite consideration. That is, a promise. And you might ask yourself, why is a promise not consideration? Well, it's because of a very specific blend of economic thought. The idea goes like this. If I give you $10, society hasn't gotten any wealthier. Because I lost $10, you gained $10, and so it took some energy, like half a calorie, for me to walk up there and hand it to you. That's a transaction cost. And so because nothing was gained and a little something was lost, we don't think that those things are by themselves a wealth-generating engine. Whereas if I say I will give you $10 and you will give me a mug of coffee, then at least there is the argument that both of us are somewhat better off. If you've been paying attention to our theories of efficiency, this division between promises, and this will be on the bar exam, a bare promise is simply not enforceable. For the promise, you can get reliance damages, that's what we're about to get into. A bare promise, though, is not enforceable as a contract. And if you've been paying attention, you might say, well, wait a minute, hang on a second. What if you need the $10 more than I need the $10? Haven't we, in fact, made society better off by taking $10 away from me and giving it to you? If you're interested in that kind of thing, this is why we have the St. Petersburg paradox. It's a wonderful thing to look up online as to why, in fact, inevitably, for someone who has a whole lot of money, each dollar, like a dollar to Bill Gates is just worth less to him than it is to any of us. And that's actually mathematically, it must be true, or the whole discipline of economics falls apart. So go take a look at the St. Petersburg paradox if you're into it. But what it does mean is that as far as Pareto efficiency is concerned, we enforce bargain for exchanges. As far as Caldor-Hicks efficiency is concerned, we may in fact be making the world better off. Maybe, although we run into the same subjectivity problems that we had before. How do you know that I value the $10 less than you do? Or more, that I value it less than you do? You might think that, but you don't know me. You don't know my life. You don't know how many creditors are calling me up right now, right? So because of that same subjectivity problem, we're still left wondering. But I wanted to flag that there, that consideration is our big doctrine. It sets contracts apart from everything else. The reason that we do it is because of the wealth-generating properties of contracts and bargain for exchanges. And we also, though, may begin to question the economic theory that makes that division. That's what we've been doing so far. We then turned from, okay, if promises aren't contracts, what are they? And if somebody does make a bare promise, a promise unsupported by consideration coming in the other direction, what do we do about it? And the answer has become over time Section 90 of the Restatement. promissory estoppel. Now, we had some great questions after class last time saying what is equitable estoppel and what is promissory estoppel. And I think what I'm going to do is I'll give you the 3 stages of promissory estoppel, or it's also called detrimental reliance. Promissory estoppel or detrimental reliance, they're the same thing. And I'll give you the 3 stages of it historically. I think everybody understands from our first class that Ricketts versus Scawthorne is in the book to show us the old law, right? The old law as it is developing, just like Hamer versus Sidway was in the book to show us the old law of consideration and how it's developing. And when you look at Ricketts versus Scawthorne, you're already seeing the court start to use some language that we will use now, but never again in this class. One problem is that you'll also start to see similar language in other classes, and you're like, that is a mutant variant of what we were talking about over here. How does that fit together? And by telling you this history, I'm hopeful that you'll be able to mostly take what I'm about to say and move it into other classes. So we started with the concept of equitable estoppel, or what was called estoppel en paix, means basically shut your mouth. Estoppel means you are, in all cases, estoppel means you are estopped. Talk to the hand. You are supposed to not raise a defense or some other valid thing that you could have said in court. You could have said it, but you can't say it now. Why? Because of something you did. And the place that estoppel en paix or equitable estoppel started was one of the grounds for when you take, for example, civil procedural, you'll talk about collateral estoppel. It goes to this. Look, you can't tell the court that your case is about this, and then later on tell the court, yeah, we were just kidding. I know, we've done piles and piles of pleading. We've done piles and piles of pleading. The other side's responded. We've done depositions, but we're just going to change our whole theory of the case. We're just going to say that actually something else is true. No. The court's going to say, having told the court that A is true, you are estopped from being able to say later on that A is not true if the other party has relied on your statement. You can see why, right? Otherwise you would just mousetrap people. Your first pleadings would be complete nonsense. And then the other party would respond to it. And you're like, haha, fooled you. You wasted a lot of time. You wasted the court's time. You probably wasted all of our time. The world is a worse place. So we're going to shift it completely. The court said you can't do that. A modern version of that in your civil procedure class is going to be some of these questions, we'll use the same word estoppel, of collateral estoppel, where once you've said something within a case, you can't say the opposite under certain circumstances. And that can be over quite an extended series of cases. Say, on appeal, you can't just suddenly change your whole tune, depending on what's happened there. And in fact, even across other cases, if you lose on a certain issue, then you may be estopped from asserting certain statements in those other cases because they have already been asserted to one court and they have already been adjudicated, and so you are estopped from asserting them. Now here's where the mutation starts. And you might ask yourself, why are courts mutating it? What's going on? Because this is a strange doctrine to move from. You told the court one thing, you are now estopped from telling the court something else. Because now, with promissory estoppel, this is not equitable estoppel, this is mutation number 1. With promissory estoppel, it's you told Fred something, and Fred relied on it, and therefore you are estopped? Question mark? Estopped? Well, you're not really estopped. Already estoppel starts to become a problem. What would you be estopped from asserting? If we were being really technical, what defense in a promise case would you be estopped from asserting? Yeah?
Would it be like keeping your assets, like your right to your own property?
Keeping your right to your own property, but the whole idea is like, I promised to give you my car, right? Yeah.
That the promise is not valid?
That the promise is not valid because of the lack of consideration. If we were going to be doing this by the book, right? If we were going to be doing this by the book, what we would do is we would say, you are stopped from raising the defense of consideration. But is that what's happening in Ricketts versus Scowthorne? We're already seeing the mutation. To be clear, what's going on here is you made a promise, somebody relied on it, right? You made a promise, somebody relied on it, and then you are somehow held back from raising a defense to enforcement. But what would be the case if you were truly stopped from raising the defense of consideration? It would be enforced exactly as a contract. Yeah. Hold that thought. Remember I said we're going to keep mutating? That's exactly where we're going with all of this. In Midwest versus Orion, you start to see it. You're like, you know what? This is less a promise. So promissory estoppel is a promise. It is not supported by consideration, but we kind of enforce part of it to the tune of your out-of-pocket costs, not to the tune of your expectation measure of damages, but we kind of enforce it without consideration because even though there is no consideration, you are stopped from asserting lack of consideration. But we, at least at the Ricketts versus Scowthorne and D&G Bacardi level, we're no longer enforcing this purely just as a contract. We're enforcing it as a promise, and you get a different damages remedy out of it. But when we get into D&G Bacardi, we're going to find out we end up exactly where you predicted. These promissory estoppel cases start absolutely acting as if they are something else entirely. Failed contracts cases that have just been patched up. That's stage 3. And as of stage 3, one of the authors of this book, Professor White, begins to become profoundly concerned for the future of contract law. Right? If you can use promissory estoppel to start replacing key things you need to make and enforce a contract, well, then you don't really need those things to make and enforce a contract now, do you? Right? So there's this assault that Professor White's worried about. I have to say, his concerns are overblown. Most courts are pretty traditionalist about contract law, and they're like, look, if we wanted a contract, we would have a contract. If you don't have a contract, go under some other theory, fine, but let's be clear, this is not a contract in wolf's clothing, right? In sheep's clothing. We don't get to do that. We don't get to backdoor contracts by using the doctrine of promissory estoppel. But you will absolutely see several cases throughout this class where they do exactly that. And in fact, D&G Bacardi is one of them. So it's going to come really quickly. That's the history of promissory estoppel. It starts in equitable estoppel. It mutates into a quasi-contract doctrine, allowing partial kind of enforcement of certain promises that have the black letter law as follows. The party makes a promise that it is foreseeable the recipient of the promise will rely on, and in fact they do reasonably rely on that promise, and injustice would be avoided by some partial enforcement. The remedy is overwhelmingly reliance damages. That is not the value of the promise, but the out-of-pocket costs. Another way of looking at it is, sometimes lawyers talk about this and they start using Latin at you without any warning and at high velocity. A contracts case is going to try to put you back into the status, sort of post, ex post status. That is, if the contract had been performed, how much money would you have in your bank account? And that's what a contracts case is going to be about. That's the expectation measure. A detrimental reliance case is going to try to put you not in the position as if the promise had been performed, but they will try to put you in the position ex ante of the contract of the promise never having been made. Can you see that? Can you see that if I say, if you move to Lexington, I will pay for your tuition, completely unenforceable, unless we can turn that first clause into bargain for exchange, as we talked about last time, right? Completely unenforceable. But if you move to Lexington in reasonable reliance on that promise, then you get detrimental reliance damages of your out-of-pocket costs moving here, which does not give you the unbelievably awesome benefits of a legal education at W&L. It doesn't put you into the position you would have been in had the promise been fulfilled. It puts you in the position that you would have been in had the promise never been made. And we're going to have to keep our eye on that ball when we turn to D and G. Now, this is a good place to stop, break. We've had our chance to warm up the circuits. We've done our history. We've caught up to the class. Is there anything, any questions that anybody has about anything in the class so far? Yeah, Liam.
So this is about the difference between reliance and restitution.
Oh, yeah.
I know restitution's more of a damage and reliance is more of a claim. I don't know if that's true. Okay.
No. So let us be very, very clear. First, at the beginning of the class, we will have 3 major causes of action that we can independently bring in most jurisdictions. Not in all, but in most jurisdictions. If they let you plead in the alternative, sometimes they won't let you plead in the alternative because they will say, if you've got a contract, you may not bring these other ones. You have to stick to the contract, right? But in some jurisdictions, they will let you do it. I'll draw on those jurisdictions just to give you the structure of the course. Count 1, you'll get a set of cases. You'll get a set of facts, right? Count 1, breach of contract. What are you looking for? Offer, acceptance, consideration, breach, no defenses. There's you want to get your remedy. Count 2, promissory estoppel, detrimental reliance, right? Count 3, restitution, quantum meruit. There's some Latin at you with no warning. Quantum meruit. That is a third thing. That's a third cause of action. The problem with just me shutting up at this point is that also each of these causes of action comes with a default, an expected remedy that is often called by lawyers the same thing. So the remedy for breach of contract is? Can be, although almost never except for land Picassos and movable goods over $500. Damages? What kind of damages? What kind of damages? Monetary? Clearly, because these are legal claims. Nate, yeah? What's that? Very, very rarely, and boy do I have to explain the difference between legal and equitable at some point, although not now. Don't let me get away with that. I do have to explain that. Yeah. Is it reliance damages? It's expectation damages. Okay, so I'm going to come right back to you then. When do you get reliance damages? Count 1, breach of contract, you get expectation. What would you expect? What did you expect from your mutually beneficial bargain? Each party is supposed to get what's called the benefit of the bargain. That's your expectation measure of damages. All right? Now, we're over here at remedies. You've picked another remedy. By the way, I'm going to show you how you're right, but for now, we're going to stick with this sort of strict, regimented view. Reliance damages. How do you get reliance damages? What's your pleading over here to get reliance damages? Promissory estoppel gets you reliance damages. Finally, quantum meruit or restitution gets you what remedy usually? Restitution, which is not confusing at all. The claim of restitution gets you the remedy of restitution. Sometimes it's useful to think of the claim of restitution getting you a remedy that's called disgorgement. Disgorgement means, because the theory of restitution is you received something that it was not fair for you to keep, and therefore your remedy is give it back. The problem is, as has been pointed out, we now do the thing that the Ghostbusters told us not to do. And I know I am dating myself. What is it? We cross the streams. Because as we will see, and as we are about to see, which is why I am yelling about it right now, as we are about to see, and I'll give you a clean example so you can just nail it down, all right? As we're about to see, sometimes for a breach of contract action, your best remedy is going to be reliance damages. Sometimes a promissory estoppel case is not a promissory estoppel case, it's a failed contracts case, and so guess what your remedy is? Expectation. Sometimes, as we will see in, I don't know, about 20 minutes, probably longer, I tend to go on, as we'll see in a few minutes in T&V, we will see that sometimes your restitution standard, what is the unfair amount that you must disgorge in return? Oh, it just happens to be identical to the expectation measure of the contract, which is basically that entire TVA case. All right? I'm going to give you a clean example that jumps to the end of the class just so you see it. You and I enter into a contract. You will rent me vans. I am going to start up a new Meals on Wheels delivery service. All right? You breach. There are no vans. My business folds. What is our count in our claims? Count 1 is breach of contract. Anybody unclear on that? Like I handed it to you. Do not look a gift horse in the mouth. If I say on my exam, or if the bar examiners say on the bar exam, the parties have concluded a valid contract, they are asking a question about the remedies. They are not asking a question about whether the contract exists. So take the freebie. This is a contract. Now, what's the remedy? It's got to be reliance. Why can't it be expectation?
Because your business didn't expect to profit.
Or, I did. You know what? In fact, I believed in my business model. I thought, look, ChatGPT told me this is how I was going to make money. I believed in this, and I think I would have made $1 billion in this. And that's what I say to the court, and the court says,
We're not in the business of assessing how much you're going to make.
yeah, exactly. We can't, there's like, not only is this like our subjectivity problem, but like now this is our subjectivity problem given the super soldier serum, right? This is, right? We have no idea. And so therefore, just as a practice tip, it is routine to only get reliance damages in a breach of contract case for a new business. The reason I give you that one is not because you're like, oh, write it down, that was the point of law, that was the black letter law for today. It's because I need you to see there are 3 causes of action that we're going to do all semester. And there are 3 big remedies, and they kind of go together. And the artistry, the art of being a lawyer in this space, is actually crossing the streams and switching them so that you can get exactly what you need when you need it. So that when opposing counsel says, Your Honor, we know we breached the contract, it turns out that this new business was entirely too speculative. Therefore, although we have lost the case, our damages are 0. And if I let that stand, that's called me losing the case. I don't care, right? I don't care if there's a breach of contract if the damages are 0. And so then I come back and I say, I know, Your Honor, but it's routine in breach of contract cases for new businesses for us to get our out-of-pocket costs in setting up the business. And that can be very substantial, right? As we're about to see in D&G. Other questions? Yeah.
So, I like that example of the vans, but let's flip it. Imagine they rent you a van for $500 a day.
Yep.
And you keep it 2 days more.
Yep.
Is that restitution because you unjustly enriched from like the vans for 2 days? So are you set to give them back $1,000?
The Germans have a wonderful word, right? Ja is yes, nein is no, and in this circumstances they would say jein. Here's why. First of all, if I have a contract with you to keep the van for a week, and that is a requirement in the contract, I keep the van for a week, and I owe you $500 per day that you keep it, and then I keep it for longer than a week. Count 1 is breach of contract. What's the measure of, we might as well just like skip to the end of the class. That way we don't have anything to do at the end of the class. Y'all can just kind of like sit back and relax. What's our remedy going to be at the end of that? It could be disgorgement. By the way, as you're describing, it could be disgorgement. Describe why it looks like disgorgement.
Because it's the unjust enrichment
Yeah, like I was unjustly enriched by keeping it
for 2 days longer.
for 2 days longer. Sure. How's the court going to frame it? If I were writing this, would I ask for disgorgement as my first line remedy? No, I'm going to ask for what, Nick? Ask for expectation. Make the same argument, but make it sound like expectation.
Just because we have a contract and you're continuing to be under the contract, and I would expect to gain the 500 each day if you're continuing.
The contract says 500 a day. I expected to get 500 a day. You did not pay me 500 a day. My expectation measure of damages under the contract is 500 a day. Everybody see that before we get to point 3. Let's return to your point, which is something like this. There is no writing. I know I'm jumping ahead to the statute of frauds. There is no writing, and the 2 days longer that I keep it are actually days 366 and 367. Now, the rule that you don't quite know yet is that a contract which by its terms cannot be performed in under a year, that is, a contract that goes over a year for services, is one of these important contracts that must be in writing in order to be enforceable. So, you cannot have a contract enforceable for more than a year without a writing. And here we have a contract that's supposedly been a contract, but it goes longer than a year, and you don't have a writing, so you can't enforce it. Right? You would have a contract. You would have the expectation measure. What are your damages going to be? Don't move an inch. Well, what are your damages going to be? Yeah, reliance. It's going to be restitution. Do you see it? It's a failed contract because you don't have the writing. So all you do is you're like, you know what? I've noticed that these two measures of damages in the circumstance could arguably be the same. I can't enforce this as a contract because it's a contract by its terms that doesn't go over that goes over a year. And in fact, we don't have a writing for it. But can I get my money? Yup. See it? That's why we're doing this. That's why promissory estoppel and restitution keep getting taught in this class and not like, by the way, Doug Grendelman is no longer here, or he would come and haunt me because he wrote most of the restatement third of restitution and unjust enrichment, not the restatement second of contracts, right? The restatement third of restitution and unjust enrichment, and his entire battle cry was restitution is its own completely independent cause of action. So he did teach restitution and unjust enrichment as a separate class, right? But these things get taught in this class not just because they are separate causes of action. If that were true, we would have separate classes. It's because they get hauled back in when something goes missing, right? It's your same move, okay? Cool, further questions? Yeah, Valeria. Yep.
But it doesn't matter if like the industry standard kind of doesn't seem like it's in good faith, like it's kind of shady.
Yeah, that's right. And we'll see that again and again. The Eastern's not the best case for it because in Eastern, they were both honest about the fact that they were fuel freighting and fuel freighting was common in the industry. And you can be like, okay, for the most part, fuel freighting seems to be fine unless you're doing the tanker truck move, right? But we can see other cases. There's one case in particular that I'm thinking about from an advanced textbook. And here it was quite similar case. It was a gas sales case, but they weren't selling to airlines. They were selling to their own franchise organizations. This is like BP selling to BP stations. And their listed price was this common listed price that was just in a periodical, just like Platt, just like Eastern Airlines. But the trick was they were also independently underselling the listed rate to people who weren't their franchisees. Why would they do that? Why would McDonald's do the equivalent of sell hamburger patties to anybody but McDonald's franchisees at a lower rate and force McDonald's franchisees to buy at a higher rate? Yeah.
It kind of reminds me of Costco.
Because?
The lower quality, I mean, it could be the exact same product, but the fact that there's a higher tier with a better price, with a higher price, people think it looks more expensive.
Right, so that, great point, and we can talk about Giffen goods later on. Turns out that sometimes when the price goes up with any luxury good, sometimes more people buy it as the price goes up. That's an interesting phenomenon. That's not what was going on in this case, but I love the thought. Yeah.
The
franchisees don't have anywhere else they can purchase it.
The franchisees don't have anywhere else they can purchase it.
Also, if McDonald's is buying it at a higher price, then they have to sell it at a higher price so they can make more of a profit.
So they're making more of a profit, so they want more money. I liked what I was hearing here. What was that?
I just said captive audience.
Yeah, they're a captive audience. What do you think they were trying to do with the franchises? If Tesla were doing this with car dealerships, what would you say? Or if Apple were doing this with tech dealerships, what would you say?
Trying to take ownership.
Yeah, they were trying to drive their own damn franchisees out of the market so that they could take over the franchises. And there was an email that said that. And in answer to your question, the court was still like, nope, those are the posted fair catalog prices. A posted price is presumably in good faith. It's the posted Amazon level catalog price, not bad faith. So yeah, even if the industry practice is pretty shady, the court's going to give you a pass on it, at least in my experience. Further questions? Yeah.
I don't know if this is related enough, but you know how there's certain things about like airline pricing adjusting based off the person how much they think you can pay?
Yep.
How does that fit into this?
Well, first of all, given that I'm heavily focused around contracts for data and the problem with most of what happens to contract law, right? Remember, contract law was the law of bargain for exchange. Now it is the law of click I agree and you're screwed. Why do they want you to click I agree and you're screwed? It's because they need all of your data. Why do they need all of your data? It's because they need to sell you things. It's like playing economic poker with somebody who can see your cards. They'll be able to guess your reservation price so that they can take all of the consumer surplus. Remember our division of consumer surplus that we talked about? How do you feel about Uber knowing that you will pay up to 10 times surge pricing if your phone is less than 5% and you are presently in a dangerous neighborhood? That's what's going on. So, in answer to your question, airline prices is called, and I'm not using the word discrimination the way we usually use it. Airline pricing is an example of perfect price discrimination. What you're doing is you're charging, as Mongan and Bernasek wrote in a book you should all read, they are charging all you can pay. That's the price. They're setting the price at all you can pay. And that's the problem with our capuchin monkeys. Because when the price is all you can pay, you are losing out on pretty much all of the consumer surplus you could have gotten, and they are taking pretty much everything out of it. And once you realize that, then people stop engaging in the market, and that's why I think economics has broken down in this space, because being treated unfairly, in fact, causes people not to contract. And when people don't contract, every time people don't contract, God pops a balloon. That's deadweight loss. I wish that the neoclassical law and economics establishment of the University of Chicago could get their heads out of their orifices and realize that treating people unfairly, which is what this is, causes deadweight loss. 'Cause it does. More. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm taking it back to Laporte v. Blum.
Yep.
But I'm curious, so in that case we specifically learned that the recitation doesn't matter because people don't really do it anymore. But the fact that they had basically, even though the grandparents didn't write it in their will, the fact that they knew that they wanted the children to continue, that's enough, despite the recitation price.
Love it. So, first of all, what is a judge's motivation? I am answering your question. I didn't just like wander off into the woods again. Justice. No. I mean, like, sure, but really? Have you read opinions?
I feel like in a contracts case, they're trying to find out what both parties would have agreed upon.
Find out what both parties would have agreed upon.
To interpret the law and not get overturned in the future.
Not get overturned on appeal. They are about as bad as prosecutors. You will never find a lawyer who's more addicted to their own crap than a prosecutor who's obviously done something sketchy and then their conviction is about to be overturned. Same deal for judges. They hate being overturned. They keep statistics on it. They are aware how often they get overturned. They do not like it at all. Why would I say that here? Because what the court's doing is it's layered two distinct arguments so that the court's not going to get overturned if either of these are true. And this is a good lesson for you because when you argue to a court, you give them as many ways to let you win as you can. My first year as a young attorney at Jones Day in Columbus, Ohio, I came hot off of a federal clerkship. They gave me a case. They said, find the answer. I did. I researched. I wrote this long memo as I had been taught. This long memo, this is the right answer, and this is the solution here. Boom. Partner looked at it and said, great. Where's the rest of the brief? How do you win if the judge doesn't agree with that one? Let's come up with 15 other ones. Same practice for you that the judge is doing here. The judge has made two independent arguments for why there is consideration for this option. And in both cases, the judge wins. The first argument the judge makes is black letter. Under Restatement 87.1, an option is considered to be fully supported by consideration if there is a bare recitation of consideration, regardless of whether the consideration actually changed hands. That's just black letter law out of Restatement 87.1. That had to do with the option to buy. The consideration for the option to buy was the recitation of the $10. Can you imagine an option worth $400,000 on a bad day, and we know it was worth way more than that because that's why we had the lawsuit? That option to buy that is only $10? That was defendant's point in the case, right? But that was step one, that there is consideration because the parties said there was, and the court's not going to inquire into that. But even if the court loses that, even if a superior court says, no, we're not going to adopt 87.1, or if the superior court says, wait a minute, a $10 option that's worth at least $1 million, that's way too much like our money for money example that we used earlier. We're not going to call that consideration unless we see the money changing hands. Even if a superior court said that, and they didn't, 87.1 remains both the law of this case and what I want you to learn for the exam and for the bar exam. But even if they did say that, this judge is still not getting overturned because this judge has a second theory of consideration for the option. That there was a bargained for exchange. The boys got the option to buy the land because the grandparents wanted them to continue the farm. Promise for a promise. If you continue to use the farm and run the farm, we will give you this option. Do you see how that's a completely different argument? See how the judge wins no matter what? That's what's going on.
Thank you.
Cool. My pleasure. Anything else, y'all? Yeah.
So I know we didn't touch on it super, but with Harrington and Taylor
Yep.
versus Webb and McGowan,
Yep.
I don't really see how they're different, but it seems like the decisions were very different. And the bill mentions like a carve out or like a caveat that is still in the restatements.
Well, so just get black letter for a second. Harrington versus Taylor is what you should take forward into your life. The black letter law is that past or moral consideration does not count as consideration for a contract. But Webb versus McGowan still gets footnoted in every damn treatise. And it's like, there was that chance. It's very much, so you're saying there's a chance, right? That kind of stuff. As to whether they are consistent, they are not. Judges are different people at vastly different times in vastly different contexts. To expect consistency from them would be nonsense. With Winston Churchill, we can say, I think, he's getting this attributed all the time, consistency is the hobgoblin of small minds. Judges do not have small minds. They are going to come up with a range of ways of approaching this. If you had to, though, Harrington versus Taylor is by far the majority rule, and Webb versus McGowan is so ridiculously small that I would say it basically doesn't exist except to show the majority rule. Good question, Scott. More. Anything else before we launch into this stuff? Great, let's pick up then. So, we're going to pick up with D&G if you don't mind. And then I'm fair warning for those of you who are on call, one of you will be assigned as opposing counsel here. We've already had D&G set up. Just to remind us, here's what happened. We have this distributor in Indiana. The distributor then, there's this big consolidation of distributorships. The distributor loses 2 of their main liquor lines, and they are worried about whether they can stay in business. If they can keep Bacardi and one other distributor, they can stay in business. One of the heads of Bacardi meets with the head of D&G at a conference, basically at a different event, and they have a conversation during which this higher up in Bacardi assures D&G that they are not going to pull the Bacardi distributorship. In reliance on that, will I call it a promise? I don't know. Maybe that's the thing we're fighting about. In reliance on that statement, we will say, then D&G turns down an offer. Bacardi promptly withdraws the liquor line. D&G is forced to sell at what's called a fire sale. They're forced to sell really fast. And it turns out that every time you sell fast, you get a bad price. And they did. They got a bad price to the tune of $550,000 worse. We had just gotten to the point where, and remind us again, why isn't this a breach of contract case?
There was no signed contract between the two, it was just a statement.
There was no signed contract between the two. Why else? Yep. It was an at-will relationship, you were going to say? The same thing. Okay, let me just make sure I've got everybody marked off here. Great. Fantastic. Yeah, so very much the same, very much at will, which means they did have a contract, right? If I sell Bacardi, they have to pay me as, like, if I'm acting as their distributor and I sell it, they have to pay me, so we get that. They don't have to keep that distributor open for 24 more hours, which means that even the promise to keep the line open, the court says, what about that? It was an at-will distributorship. They said, are you going to close the line down? And Bacardi says, nope, we're not going to close down the line.
And so they're saying that promise.
Why can't that promise be consideration?
Because the timeline in that promise basically expires as soon as they say it, because that promise is also at will.
Yeah, because that promise is also at will. Well done. Right? So again, doesn't help you. So we're now stuck. Wait a minute, hang on a second. I do want to ask one question. If this were a contracts case, skip to the end of the class. If this were a contracts case, what would the remedy be, right? So contracts, the way this works is you measure before and after the performance of the contract to get that expectation, right? So we're going to say you get what? If the contracts, if everything had gone through, if they had not pulled the distributorship and then they had, or if they had sold at the higher price, what would their expectation be?
Like monetary damages for whatever, for that loss that came about.
Yeah, monetary damages for the loss that came about to a breach, which is, roughly, if this were a contracts case, and it's not. But if this were a contracts case, those damages would start looking a lot like $550,000. Ooh, shit. But we just said this is not a contracts case, so keep your eye on that ball. Okay, now, which side would you like? You want the distributor or you want Bacardi?
I'll do distributor.
Well done. All right, so you're going to do the distributor. And then, Liam, if I could ask you to step up as opposing counsel. So you've got Bacardi. All right. What's your argument then? We've had it. The judge has just said this is not a contracts case. And since the judge is absolutely on point, we are done with that argument, right? So, given that, then what's your move?
I would argue basically that the promise by Bacardi to continue the line created a reliance on Bacardi because D&G chose not to sell, assuming that that contract would continue. And then I would say that the failure to basically continue with that contract created severe financial implications for the company, and that forced a sale that wouldn't have happened if Bacardi had kept their promise.
Okay, great. So I think that's your argument. Let's break it down. Let's get the common law. Let's get the basic elements of a Section 90 claim. That's what's going on. What's our first element of a Section 90 claim? And co-counsel can chime in if you want. What's your first one? Yeah. A promise, right? Seems like you've got a promise pretty much nailed down. That seems right. Yep.
Should be reasonably expected in this action.
A promise that can be reasonably expected to induce reliance. That's part 2. What's part 3? Yeah, David?
It induces reasonable reliance by the promisee.
It does, in fact, reduce that. And then we get the crap prong, which is what? Well, detriment. That is, they do rely to their detriment. But what's our fourth crap prong? Yeah.
Of a definite and substantial nature.
A definite and substantial nature. And then we have our sort of injustice. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say injustice.
Right, and so injustice absent enforcement, which they basically tack on so that they can get out of doing this if they don't want to. All right. Let's make each element. Was there a promise?
There was a promise that they would continue the line.
Perfect. So there was a promise. Liam, was there a promise?
I'm going to say there was not a promise because there was no obligation to follow what we were saying.
True, although ha-ha sucker plays a little bit less well in court than you might think. Like, you should never have believed me. You're right. You're right. You're on the right track. But let's turn this into something that you want to actually say in front of a jury.
There was a promise.
Ooh.
Oh, really?
Oh man. You want to say that? No, that means you said inside. What happens if you say there was a promise? Yeah, then I'm going to move on to the next prong. That's what's going to happen there, right? So why is this not a promise?
Because there's no consideration.
There's no consideration? But I can make a promise without consideration all day long. Right? A promise that's supported by consideration, that's a contract. It's not a contract case.
Yeah.
Take another crack, or you want to call in co-counsel? Your call.
All right, my last crack will be that the person who made the promise is not actually able to make a promise on my behalf.
All right, we have got to have a long conversation about that one. Not true in this case, but boy, is it true in like the next 15. And I would love to argue this. I would like to officially announce on YouTube, because that's where these things go up, on YouTube, that Joshua Fairfield is not authorized to sign contracts on behalf of Joshua Fairfield. And therefore, I can get out of every contract I make. Screw these corporations and their bullcrap, which is exactly what's going on in TVA, where they screw a guy out of his contract. They entered into that contract, every bit of it. TVA entered into that contract. They signed it, they sealed it, and then later on they said, but Fred isn't allowed. It's the same thing in Midwest versus Orion, where Reese basically negotiates the whole deal, and then they're like, but we get to get out of it because it turns out that in some filing cabinet somewhere, guarded by Fred, it says Reese isn't allowed to enter into contracts. You know what it says up in my office, in my filing cabinet? It says I'm not liable for any contracts either. Complete nonsense. But an argument that makes that is the argument that drives the whole problem in TVA, so it's a legit argument to make. It doesn't work here. The guy was apparently high up enough in the organization that they couldn't say that with a straight face. All right, Lucas, yeah.
If you took it as a literal promise, it would be indefinite in nature. So
Yeah.
you would never be able to withdraw.
Tell me again, Your Honor, what we were supposed to have promised?
Yeah, it doesn't really make sense for us to promise for all time to never withdraw.
So right? And that's exactly what the court said. They said, we know it's not for all time, and we know that you didn't change the at-will nature of it, so because of indefiniteness, there was no promise. There was nothing there. We didn't promise to hold it open for, let's try it. Had they promised to hold it open for 2 weeks, what would we say? Yeah, that's a promise, right? But what they did here, too indefinite to treat that way. Any further questions? Yeah, go ahead.
Does it also in the notes it says that
expectations in sales and there were no changes in the market conditions. So could it also be that since there were large changes in the market conditions, seeing that everything was consolidating, that would...
So maybe the changes, maybe you'd say there's no change, that would give you the sense that this was going to go on for a while, right? Maybe saying big change leaves us with the sense that nope, this remains very much every bit as at will as it was, because we have to have that adaptability of an at will agreement in order to manage these changes in the market. All of those go back and forth on this argument as to whether or not there was something that was definite enough to be a promise here. By the way, are you going to let him get away with saying that this promise was too indefinite because they didn't say it was 2 weeks? Make it more definite.
I would say that he repeatedly doing negotiations with the company that was going to, National, that was going to buy out, this contacted Bacardi and asked for assurance of, is the line going to stay with D&G? And they repeatedly made that assurance. They knew that much of D&G's valuation and decision of whether to sell was based off of statements from Bacardi that they would continue the line, presumably beyond the day that National said we're not going to sell. And so those statements created a level of reliance on Bacardi.
On reliance. By the way, we could also do this using the strange superhero who wanders these halls. A reasonable person, right? So let's try it. Would you like to buy these glasses? You say yes. I say great. I promise to sell you these glasses. You promise to buy these glasses. I give you the glasses. And this is actually how people sell companies all the time. It drives me nuts. So I give you the glasses, and then we have a fight about what the price was going to be for the glasses. Now, do you think the court's going to say there was no contract there? Nope. So what's the court going to do for the price? A market appraisal, which we will call in this context? Yeah, a reasonable price as determined by what you find it in the market catalog, right? So absolutely. Meaning, use that. I've just handed you the lawyer's biggest hammer of all time. Swing for the fences. This was plenty definite, Your Honor. I know they didn't say they would keep it open infinitely, but they were going to keep it open
for at least an extended period of time.
An extended period of time? What word are you going to use here? Not an extended period of time. That's how you lose the case. A reasonable period of time. They're going to keep it open for a reasonable period of time, given what you knew about our sensitive negotiations to sell or not sell our business. All right, and then back to Liam for the response.
Well, I mean, a reasonable company would also know that a promise is not fully enforced unless there's a contract.
Right? That is, is it reasonable to rely on this? And that comes to our second prong. So now we flipped over, right? We flipped over to, first, is there a promise? Second, is it reasonably foreseeable that the person will respond? And that's got two parts, foreseeability and reasonableness of the relier's response. It has to be foreseeable to the promisor, and then the promisee's action and reliance must be reasonable in response. Let's try it. How do you feel about foreseeability? Do you feel good about winning that prong or bad about winning that prong? It's foreseeable that your company would take this action of turning down that offer based on these statements.
I would feel good about foreseeability.
You're going to win that all day long and twice on Sundays, right?
Yeah.
Knock it out of the park. Go for it.
I would say feel good about foreseeability because, to go back to the prior point, basically a lot of back and forth of asking Bacardi will they stay with or continue with the line with D&G, and then it seems quite foreseeable that for a reasonable amount of time they will stay with
Right.
D&G.
Yeah, so let's compare this, by the way, to Bacardi just out of the blue. There's been no conversation. Bacardi just pulls the account. Well, that would be just perfectly okay by everybody. It's only because we had this conversation about selling the business, and we won't sell the business if you stay with us, and we will sell the business if you don't. And you see, and that makes it perfectly foreseeable. But do you lose on this? Because you were already starting with a different thing. You're saying, no, it's not that it wasn't foreseeable that D&G would turn down the offer based on what we said. It's that
Not reasonable to rely.
tell me about that. It's not reasonable to rely on that as a promise.
Yeah, I mean, if this was the most important thing to selling your company, then you should either try to get a contract with us, or you should maybe look for alternatives.
Right. If it's that important, like get it in writing, right? Exactly. So we're going to have that back and forth. Foreseeability, I think D&G takes it. Reasonableness, at least there's this argument then that Bacardi can push back. All right. How about actual reliance? How do you feel about that one?
I would say there was a level of reliance in that the price was, with National, the sale was turned down, again, based off of what Bacardi was saying. So there was a reliance created on that continuation for a reasonable period of time.
So we did, in fact, and I like how you're backloading the other prongs at the same time. You're like, it was a reasonable period of time. It was open for a reasonable period of time, Your Honor. But we're now down here on was there reliance, and you did turn down that offer. That's pretty good evidence. You turned down the offer after the conversation. Got anything to say there? And I'm saying that with I don't know what I'd say either.
I mean, I don't know why you turned down that offer. It seemed like a good offer.
Yeah, it was totally somebody else at that conference. This is Fred. He's not allowed to contract on our behalf. We don't even know what the guy's doing here, right? He just breaks into the corporate offices sometimes, hands out contracts. All right. Which is exactly what TVA is about to start arguing. Okay, so we get that, and then we get injustice, and we can talk about injustice being avoided, but da-da-da-da-da-da. Here's the thing, unless we're able to really make this point about the promise stick, we do have a bit of an issue here if we just fight this internally to a promissory estoppel claim. If you fight him here on this battlefield, Liam, it's looking rough. You're about 3-1. I think your reasonableness argument's really got some heft, and maybe the indefiniteness argument, that's got some real heft to it. But if you can see the courts cutting out there, what are you going to do to say, nope, we're not going to fight this on this battlefield because it's looking rough over here. We're going to fight it over here. What's the over here? And this is not in the case at all.
Okay,
I'm cheating.
Okay. My brain is going to some economic argument because that always kind of holds up.
Yeah, and besides, I'm into it.
I'm trying to think about what the economic argument would be, that it's inefficient to hold someone to a promise they make, but that's all I've got.
Well, here's one thing we do know. It is efficient to hold people to bargained for exchanges. Right?
If I'm backing Liam up here, I could argue that the price drop wasn't solely because of us pulling out.
Oh, wait till we get going, right? One way to do this is to start at the remedy and work backwards. Okay, go ahead, yeah?
Could it also be said that since there was a contract already in place, the
Yes.
promise was not a bargain for exchange?
Yeah, look, it's look, you don't have a contract. The parties' economic relations between the parties, and I know this is crazy, were determined by, the contract. Where do you get off on saying, guess what, we're going to enforce the things that you left out of your contract? Who ordered that for lunch? Suddenly, Liam's looking a lot more back in the driver's seat here, saying, wait a minute, whoa, I get it that I would lose on promissory estoppel. You need to understand, Your Honor, most states aren't going to let you bring a promissory estoppel claim if you've got a valid contract. Can you imagine suing Google for all the shit that's not in their contract? No, you hit I agree. The parties' relationship is determined by the contract. And so if you swing it back to that and make this a failed contracts case, then you can begin to see. And also, let's say that this is a failed contracts case. Tell me exactly why it would be complete nonsense. That is, each of you now as a human being or as a business owner, we will say you are all business owners. Would you ever agree to guarantee the business sale price of one of your partners?
No, because they're not your asset.
What? In what actual insane world? Right? By the way, what do we call it when somebody does guarantee somebody else's stuff? If we had to give, who said it? Insurance, right? We call that insurance. And I know something's crazy about insurance. This is wild. You know what you do with your insurer? That's not happening in this case? You write a contract. That's one. Crazy talk. I know, it's crazy. Nuts. Nuts. Two, what's in that contract? On the one hand, I promise, what's the exchange of promises in an insurance contract? I promise to pay for your stuff if it turns out, because of a fire, because of a wreck, because of a crash in the economy, because, right, whatever we're insuring, I promise to pay the difference between what you owned and then its drop in value, right? And you pay me a beeping premium every month, way too much, thank you, this month. Holy crap, I have 4 kids, right? You agree to pay me. Okay, now, knock this out of the park then. This should have been a contract, right? In fact, there was a contract. You want to follow up on that?
There was a contract, and the contract was for me to sell you liquor and you to sell that liquor to someone else.
Yeah, and what wasn't in that contract? What was this not?
It was not to ensure that your price is going to drop all of a sudden.
Right, is not to act as the general business insurance. That's what this is called. The general business insurance insurer for the value of this firm. And not only was that not in there, if it were in there, you would check the mental status of everyone involved in signing that contract. That is beeping loco. That is completely insane. No way would you have written that contract. So now, get this. We had a contract. There was a term that was not in that contract. It wasn't in that contract for a really, really good reason. And the court in this case is like, yeah, but we're going to go ahead and make Bacardi the insurer of D&G's business costs on a non-contractual theory. You ain't winning this one from the inside. Do you see what I'm saying with that? You're not winning this if you're going to fight over, is this promissory estoppel? Is this detrimental reliance? It's starting to look really good. The only way you're going to win this is if you step outside that framework, pick another battlefield and say, wait a minute, the parties had a contract. The parties had every reason to bargain for a definite period of extension. They didn't bargain for the definite period of extension. That was a choice. And on top of not bargaining for a definite period of extension, you are now doing the equivalent of writing a fully free insurance contract ensuring all market movement. Because it wasn't just that they pulled the line, we're talking other problems in the industry here, other things, this volatility you were talking about, right? All this stuff coming on. Suddenly Bacardi's the insurer for all of that? Give me a break. And if you can convince the court of that, then this is a perfect example of what I keep talking about in this framing discussion we keep having. If the court's first sentence is, the question before the court today is whether or not Indiana recognizes a cause of action for detrimental reliance where there's been a promise made and foreseeably relied upon. Who won the case? I haven't done any analysis. Who won? D&G won. If the court says, the question before the court is whether or not a contract should be deemed to include terms, including a general insurance clause, that the parties had every opportunity to negotiate and add to their contract and didn't. Who won? Bacardi won. Do you need to know what the court's going to analyze? No, you just you close it, you're done for the day. Don't tell my colleagues I'm telling you not to read the cases, right? You're done for the day. You just read it, you're like, okay, I know who won and I know why they won. That's what I keep talking about. All right. Any questions on D&G? We took a minute on it, but it's got a lot going on, and I think it's good stuff. Cool, we'll leave it there. Oh, yeah.
So is the argument here that that's because of how the lawyers framed it, or could it also be the framework that the judge in his mind?
Absolutely, the judges are, see, because why do the judges do that? Because the judge doesn't want to be overturned. And if the judge starts really talking about how this is a failed contracts case, the judge is going to get overturned. And so the judge is like, no, this is just clearly about detrimental reliance. Do not look over here. What is that behind the curtain? We don't know. It's Oz. We're not going to look, right? So yeah, the judge is absolutely framing it that way so that they don't get overturned. Huh? Well, let's try this in Virginia. No, we can't even try it in Virginia, because in Virginia they'd be like, promissory estoppel is not even a thing. But like in most states, if you said, oh yeah, count 1, breach of contract, count 2, detrimental reliance, and the response would be immediately, well, Your Honor, this is a contracts case. The parties do have a contract. It governs economic relations between the parties. And I don't know what they're doing over here, but that has nothing to do with the parties' contract. The parties' contract is what sets the legal relationships between them, not all these other theories that we use when there is no contract, right? And so you just frame it up that way, and in most jurisdictions, the court's gonna be like, yeah, this is a contracts case. There is a contract. This term is not in it, and we know why. Any further questions on D&G? Gotta check the whole room this time. All right, cool. Let's move on. So we've already done half of TVA if you've been listening. But we're going to do Midwest, and then we'll get on to TVA. Midwest is going to pick up a lot of this stuff, and it's going to be, this is arguably the case, I'm just warning you, this is the case that like lives rent-free in my brain. This is the one that I'm obsessed with and that I will be referring to pretty much all semester, because it's just got so much in it. Would you mind setting it up for me, please, Kina?
Sure thing. Okay, so Midwest Energy inquired about a franchised products from Orion for a new convenience store that Midwest was building. Ted Rees, who was the district sales manager, gave Young House a document warning against taking any action until there was a written franchise agreement. And he advised her also that the Orion franchise the other ones didn't pose any obstacle, and so that they could move forward with their franchise. And so Midwest went and changed all their building plans and built a larger store to meet their requirements. And so then Orion sent a franchise agreement, and Reeves said that he would pick up the agreement, but no contract was picked up or signed. And then Orion then said that they wouldn't issue the franchise, and so Midwest sued them for 3 things: for breach of contract, for promissory estoppel, and for fraud.
Okay. And Tierney, just warning, I'll ask you to be opposing counsel here in a minute so you can start warming up the circuits. But really quickly here, how do each one of those questions turn out? And before we kind of break it up into opposing counsel, I'll also ask you to give me the black letter law of the case, you know, what a Hornbook would write down before we actually get into the real work of the case.
So the trial court granted summary judgment on all 3 of the claims in favor of Orion because the breach of contract, there was no signature. So technically they're saying, right, there was no contract.
We have to be really careful. I think I've already started to change your mind. That's what the court said. The court was wrong because the court didn't go to W&L. And because whoever taught them contracts is now just like super embarrassed. Did it mean there was no contract because there was no writing? We haven't even studied this yet, and you'll know the answer.
Wasn't it if it's more than 1 year, it has to be in writing?
It has to be in writing for it to be formalized. That is, for it to be enforceable. Can you see that we can have a deal and the deal is not enforceable? Can you see that having a deal is different from the deal we have is enforceable? Can you see that it would be possible to have it be the other way around? Let's say that we had a signed statute of frauds writing. Let's try this. Who do I want to pick on? Leland? So it turns out that you have, in fact, promised to sell me your car. And here it is. Here's a document. And it's a signed statute of frauds writing. And there's your signature right there. And by the way, here's mine. And it's dated. So there's no statute of frauds defense. We have a signed statute of frauds writing. What's the problem with this picture?
We haven't actually exchanged anything. There's been no bargaining.
There was no deal. So therefore, every time for the rest of your contracts career and into your practice, I need you to answer 5 questions. I'm going to keep saying them. These are the 5 questions. I'm going to start sounding like George Carlin for more reasons than one. There are 5 questions that we're going to ask. Is there a contract? That is contract formation. Is it enforceable? That is formalization. What do the terms mean? That's interpretation. Are there any defenses? Does somebody get out of the contract, right? And then is there a remedy? So Formation, formalization, interpretation, defenses, remedies. The court here, and that's why I drew it out, and this is not on you. This is the mistake that the court made, so we're correcting its crap. The court says there was no contract because it wasn't in writing. That is nonsense, as we will see when we get to later cases today, I hope, although we're running a little behind. What do you need to actually form a contract? Offer, acceptance, consideration. Take the facts of this case and show me offer, acceptance, and consideration.
Okay.
Show me when it happened. When was the contract formed?
The contract forms, I think, well, when he gives her the contract. Well, it forms when they talk about it, and he says, yes, expand the store.
Or yes, expand the store. What's the key word here? By the way, you're running into an evidence problem, right? Which of these is true? There's two narratives of this case. You're going to have to carry the other narrative here in a minute. I'll find out which one you want. We'll have to carry the other narrative. But there are two narratives of this case as to whether there was a contract or not. What's our best moment to say, yeah, there was offer acceptance, fist bump? Yeah.
Whenever Orion told them to go ahead.
Yeah, when Orion said, we're going to do this, go ahead. And we will find this in the next chapter. We'll find this problem. You're negotiating. At some point, what you were negotiating became definite enough that saying, yeah, we're going to do this, fist bump, becomes a contract, right? Now there's this other narrative that says essentially, we were negotiating, and it turns out it never really worked out, and so we couldn't do business together. I need you to see that either of those could be true on these facts. That's what lawyering is. I need you to spot it and go, oh no, wait a minute, Your Honor, there was a contract, all right. It happened right there in the store. I mean, look, let's say this. Let's say that the video cameras had been on, right? You can tell this is a pre-surveillance society case. Let's say the video cameras had been on and they were able to pull the video feed, and it turns out you see Reese and Laura Younghouse going, fist bump. We're going to do this. Yeah, we agree on all these points. Break out the Diet Cokes, right? There's actually a case we'll look at later on where they actually are dumb enough to stand up in front of everybody and do a press conference saying that there was a deal when they hadn't negotiated out yet. Guess what the court decided? There was a deal, right? Okay, so we had to get that point unpacked in order to get our two narratives. And I need you to understand that this case leaves fundamentally unresolved whether there was actually a contract here or not. Now, whether there was or not, we still have a problem with enforcing it as a contract, and that is? Yeah, even if the contract existed, what's our problem?
We didn't exchange.
Well, we just argued that we did. We exchanged promises. Offer, acceptance, consideration, right? Fist bump. Any assistance? Yeah. It wasn't signed. There wasn't a signed writing. Yeah, go ahead. Okay, yeah, by the way, that gets into a little bit more, but go ahead. Tell me about the circular.
How it said that until the contract is signed and accepted, then you shouldn't start doing it.
Yeah, you shouldn't do anything. Liam, what kind of argument is that?
That's an indefinite promise?
Yeah, or rather, is it reasonable to rely on that circular as any kind of offer? Not by its own terms, it's not, because it says, don't rely on this until you've got the contract signed, sealed, and delivered. It's conditional, except then every contract is. We'll do this thing where these two companies are trying to figure out whether or not to get in bed together, or whether or not to do business together. And both of them, in every single thing they send to each other, they're like, this is not a contract, this is not the deal, this is not the deal. And they stand up in front of the TV cameras and they're like, we have a deal. And the court's like, I don't care what you wrote in the thing, you did the thing. Thou shalt not beep with the form of a contract. That is the basic lesson of this entire course. Thou shalt not. Thou shalt only, at thy peril, beep with the form of a contract. If you start playing contract cosplay, you get nailed with it. Congratulations, it's yours now. All right. So the reason that this is, even if there is a contract, it's left unresolved. We don't know. It's left for the lawyers to argue. Was there a fist bump or wasn't there? Does the contract exist or not? What we do know is whether or not it exists, it was a contract which by its terms could not be performed in under a year. Why is that? Just so you know what to look for on the bar exam and on my exam. Why could this contract not be performed in under a year? It needed to be signed. No, that's why it couldn't be enforced. It's a franchise agreement, and what is the term on the franchise agreement? Y'all start circling and highlighting terms. It's a 5-year one. 5 is more than 1. That is the thing that will tell you on the bar exam you need a writing. Important fact. 5 is more than 1. Therefore, you need a writing. With me so far? Cool, you didn't get it. All right, which side would you like? Midwest or Orion? Okay, you'll take Midwest, which means Tierney, you get Orion. Give us your best statement of the case. Why do you win?
Can I use promissory estoppel?
You can use whatever you want, although I love that you're asking that because that's clearly what the case is about. Yeah. Am I going to tell you to start with promissory estoppel though? I love it. I love it. My young Padawans, you've already become infected. You're already like, boy, they did a crap job. I can do better. Yeah. What would your count 1 be? Just back off a second. Your count 1. Count 1 is for Midwest.
Count 1, we had a contract.
Yeah, count 1, breach of contract. Look, I don't know where that went in here, but make that argument. For one thing, there are some arguments that they didn't make in this case. It turns out, remember I said we can use promissory estoppel not just to get detrimental reliance, but you can use promissory estoppel to replace something that's gone missing in the contract. Now, up till now, we've used it to replace what that went missing in the contract? I heard somebody said it. Consideration. Up until now, we've used promissory estoppel to supply the consideration that was missing in the contract. Guess what else? In many states, and in every movable goods case, you can replace with promissory estoppel? The statute of frauds. Which means that if you had a contract, and you show the court that you had a contract, and they say, yes, but statute of frauds. And you're like, yeah, but Your Honor, the law has changed here. Actually, we don't need a writing because I super believed in you. You can use promissory estoppel to replace the statute of frauds. And what that means is it's no longer a promissory estoppel case. It's a patched up breach of contract case, which means you start getting expectation measures of damages, not just reliance crap, right? So would I start? I'm here to tell you, you are right. I would take money and I would call any counsel absolutely incompetent that did not start this with, this is absolutely breach of contract. We had an agreement when you said to go ahead. It was definite enough because of the circular. The circular gave enough details and we talked about it and we said, this thing that's in this document is now going to happen. Boom. We've got evidence of that. We had a contract. I know there's a writing problem, but it turns out we can handle that issue. That's where I would start with it. Not a part of this case, but that's where I would start with it. Tierney, I'm not going to ask you to respond to that one directly other than to say, yeah, but that's not what happened here, which is not what happened here. What's your second cause of action and how are you going to win?
Okay, my second cause of action is promissory estoppel, section 90.
Yep.
And the 4 prongs, we pretty much cover all 3 of them. So a promise, we made a promise, we sat there and we hashed it over, said we're going to do the franchise agreement. Foreseeability, the foreseeability was you telling me that I need to expand my store, and so me saying, okay, great, and then the reliance is then me physically expanding said store, and so now we're at court for the injustice and the reliance damages.
Okay, cool. So that's your claim. Now, what's your best set of defenses that this is all nonsense? And first, let's just kind of work a little bit to dispose of this extra claim, because that's on me. I added that. Remind me, what's our best response to saying, yeah, there actually was a contract, we just didn't have it in writing?
That it was never signed, and we provided documentation telling you not to sign anything unless, or not to rely on anything.
Not to rely on anything unless it was signed, so that's pretty good evidence, right? But more than that, does it matter? Does it matter that it wasn't signed if my question is, tell me why there wasn't a contract?
Also, the person who was representing their side was not, or who was representing our side was not able to make that.
Okay, so there's a couple of things now. One, we're getting the Fred defense, which is Fred clearly broke into the Orion offices and wanders around negotiating agreements that he has no authority to negotiate. By the way, these corporations drive me bananas on this point. Can you imagine if this works this way? You go into a bank and there's somebody standing behind the bank, like the bank teller desk. I know nobody does this, it's all online now. And you like take out $100,000 and they're like, by the way, you just stole it because Fred here just breaks into the bank and hands people money. It turns out Fred has no ability to speak on behalf of the bank. And by the way, you've heard of Schrodinger's cat? Yeah, okay, heads I win, tails you lose is another way of looking at Schrodinger's cat. Fred only lacks authority to enter what kind of contract? Bad ones after the fact. Fred retroactively is not allowed to sign contracts that don't work out well for us. Screw these people. All right? That's called the doctrine of apparent authority. Call me when somebody uses it on you in court. I will testify. All right. That makes me mad. But so, okay, cool. By the way, as a lawyer, do you raise that? Absolutely. And it worked in this case, right? So he doesn't have the authority to do it. Tell me also why there is no contract. Give me another reason that there is no contract. What is it? What does she need to get a contract to be formed? Not to be enforced, not the writing, but to be formed.
I mean, she needs the three things that we've been talking about.
Yeah, offer, acceptance, and consideration. Okay, so
There's no acceptance.
yeah, what are you talking about? At best, she offered through her application to enter in. Where was the acceptance? We don't have a contract. So one, you can just push back on that by saying the facts do not support offer, acceptance, and consideration.
But isn't acceptance him basically like dropping off the contract and telling you to sign it and give it back to him?
Love it. The pushback is acceptance is him dropping off the contract. This turns out to be the lawyer's move. If you think that a fact is an offer or a fact is acceptance, you are in for a very, very hard time. Instead, a fact is an offer in the plaintiff's pleadings. It is not an offer in the defendant's pleadings. It is simply an invitation to treat, for example, as we will see. So you're pushing back. You're like, no, there was an acceptance. It was an acceptance when I dropped off the circular. Your response, Tierney, was that an acceptance when he dropped off the contract?
No, he said that he was going to come back, pick it up, and then sign it, and that never happened.
Yeah, and that never happened. So it's not signing it matters because that's a statute of fraud writing. It's because signing it is the symbol of acceptance of the contract. And so there was never any contract. And you can and should bill your clients to do that all day, right? Just back and forth. You see what's going on here? Yes, we had offer and acceptance. No, we didn't have offer and acceptance. Who's right? Yeah, who's paying me? I don't know. But what I do know is both attorneys are doing a hell of a good job. You see that? Okay, cool. Now, fine. We've at least made a colorable argument, and the court's inclined to listen to you on the statute of frauds defense because courts love writings because that's all they can actually rely on in these cases. They don't believe what you have to say about what happened. They believe the writing. And so the lack of a writing turns out to be fatal for the contract theory. Let's move on to promissory estoppel. What's your argument there?
For promissory estoppel, there was no injustice committed. This contract was made. There are tons of other people who would franchise for some of their product lines, and they very easily replaced this contract when this non-contract when it became apparent that it was not there. And so justice simply is not present, and that's one of the four key factors for promissory estoppel, so it can't be.
Okay, so that's one of the four key factors. You're right. In fact, you're probably on to the line of thinking that causes the case to come out the way it did. Is that the prong is that the only prong that you would fight it on? Okay, let's fight it on the rest of them. Let's go.
I was also thinking for summary judgment that originally the first court found summary judgment, and in order for them to find that, they would have to realize that a reasonable person would completely disregard any of the claims against us.
Yeah, why would a reasonable person disregard thinking that they had a deal? Why would a reasonable person be like, nah?
Because they told them not to do anything.
Because they told them not to, because they literally said not to. Yeah.
What about the whole, like, confidence, didn't they, like, tell her to get an attorney, like, from the start to look everything over, and then she didn't?
Yep.
Did you just call her, like, incompetent?
She's small I incompetent, but she's not legally incompetent. Legally incompetent would mean she'd need to be a drunk or a minor, and she's neither. But she is in fact incompetent, yeah. Like, do get a lawyer to look at these things. That's why they pay us, ladies and gentlemen. Do not go into business on your own like this stuff if you don't know what you're doing. And business people in general know very much what they're doing in terms of finding a place in the market to build a profit. They do not know what they're doing with respect to these arguments. So I think you've got a real winner there, saying essentially detrimental reliance requires a promise that you rely on, and reliance seems pretty problematic here. Any other prongs you want to hit it on?
I would revisit the statements about the circular very clearly saying, and we met our legal obligations to tell you not to make an agreement.
I would too. That's your strongest fact. I would hammer that all day long. It clearly convinced the dissent, right? What prong are you going to tie that to? You're going to take a fact, you're going to tie it to law. What law are you tying that to? You're just going to hammer on that circular language?
Would that be the reliance?
So reasonableness of the reliance, yeah. And where else could you tie it to? Could you tie the same fact back to something else?
Statute of fraud.
We got our 4, right? So you're going to make a promise that it's foreseeable that somebody else will rely on. They do reasonably rely to their detriment, and justice is avoided. Lucas.
I think you did all 3 of the first ones, because you could say it's not really a promise because you said not to act on it at all. And then you could say we didn't expect you to act on it because we told you not to.
Because we told you not to, and then
You could say a reasonable person
wouldn't have relied on it, right? No, I think that's absolutely right. And by the way, let's add the 4th for all 4. And therefore, justice doesn't ensue when we told you not to do it. We didn't expect you to do it. It was unreasonable for you to do it. Justice is not avoided when you did the thing that we told you not to do. The way to avoid that injustice is for people to tell each other what to do and not to do so they don't get hurt. So I think you can go for all 4 of them. I love it. Yeah, Nate.
But then it's heads I win, tails you lose, because Reese did tell us to do it.
It is. You're making a great point, and I'm going to make a bit of an example out of it just to drive it home. Yeah. Oh, you were expecting me to disagree with opposing counsel? No, I'm here cheerleading for both sides. Yeah, absolutely. That's what they say in response. And then I'll do something like, okay, but what do you say? Okay. Yes, no, absolutely. That is, the best fact here is the circular. The worst fact is Reese himself, who is absolutely like that meme on Reddit of the scumbag, right? Like that guy. What is the worst fact for Tierney? The single worst fact.
That he actually gave her the plans,
One gave her the plans. That's rough. That is rough for detrimental reliance. But I've got a worse fact yet. Jewel. Told her that they could verbally proceed. I think I've got an even worse fact.
Is it that he was in touch with the contractors for the expansion?
He was in touch with the contractors for the expansion. L?
That they increased their space by 800.
That they did it in reliance, so that's very much back to this, that they changed it in reliance. Joanna.
But in the dissent, doesn't it say that Ms. Younghouse conceded that Midwest probably wouldn't have made it, they wouldn't have constructed a smaller building if they known?
Well, right, so then that's a good pushback on this, but we relied by expanding it. That's a great pushback, yeah.
I guess all that Reed reported to his supervisor.
And they did what?
Go ahead.
No, they did what?
Or they terminated.
They wanted to terminate. What did they do when they terminated the contract? This is this great moment. Leland?
Was it the make yourself?
Yeah, holy shit, y'all. The guy is literally he's crouching in the bushes, like he's Homer Simpson style, just hiding. So because why is he hiding?
Because conflict is scary.
Because conflict is scary. No, why is he hiding? He messed up. Why is he hiding? Because if he shows up,
Then it would make it more formalized.
yeah, then it really begins to look like this is a done deal. So he's literally hiding. Hiding what? If there was no deal, there was no deal to dodge. Not a great fact for Reese. To be clear, that has no legal implications at all, none. The fact that he just hid out. And that's often the case. The worst thing opposing side does will not directly relate to any kind of legal argument. You have to make it there. You say, look, if he's hiding, if he's making himself scarce, why is he making himself scarce if they don't actually have a deal already? And he's trying to say, this is our last chance. We need to get out of this on this technicality. We need to get out of this on this formality. And so I'm going to dodge it at the last minute. It's like is like a reverse, reverse of Lucy and Lucy versus Zamer, right? He wanted to bind the contract, right? And Reese is like hiding out so that that contract magic doesn't happen. Not a great look for him. Okay. We do need to move on. Y'all have done an amazing job. I'm just going to open this all up to your opinions here. How do you feel about this outcome?
I feel like it's kind of standard business practice. Like, I think it is somewhat within good faith because they both were operating within the terms of normal business.
Okay. And this is going to turn out to be something that I want you to watch for the next case. I get it. This case is here so that you can see the 4 prongs of a Section 90 claim, so that you can see how a state court enacts Section 90 into law, so that you can see some of the difficulties in raising it. But I want you to watch for the next case, not the immediately next case, it's coming in a minute, where Judge Easterbrook says, wait a minute, whoa, let's try this. My business and your business are trying to figure out whether we're going to do business together. Now, we hire lawyers because we're not incompetent. We hire lawyers. That's costly. That's expensive. We do due diligence. We go through each other's books. That's costly. That's expensive. We draw up plans, and then we discuss those plans with each other. And then at the end of the day, we decide not to do business with each other. You're the judge. Raise your hand if you say, yeah, I'm going to force you people to do business together. Yeah, Judge Easterbrook either, right? His point about Midwest is exactly what the dissent says here, which is this is not a beeping promissory estoppel case. This is a failed contracts case. And you know what you call it when you should have had a contract and you didn't? A lost contracts case, right? So what I want you to see is how counsel wins this by shifting the battleground to promissory estoppel, and how you can beat it by shifting the ground back to contract law. And in fact, we will see the exact opposite case come up, where Judge Easterbrook is like, nah. When parties each undertake significant cost in anticipation of doing business with each other, it would be nonsense if each party were functionally the guarantor of the other party's expenditures in preparing for the contract. That's crazy. Can you imagine? What I spent in getting ready for the contract, you have to pay me. And what you spent paying for the contract, I have to pay you. That starts getting stupider and stupider as I say it. And so courts are just not gonna do it. So again, I want you to take the black letter law of promissory estoppel. Midwest versus Orion lives rent-free in my head all day long. I will be referring to it all semester. That's another reason to really get familiar with the case. But what I do need you to see is also, do not think that this is how cases work out overall. Two businesses are about to get together. They have expenditures. Each party bears their own expenditures. Each party is not required to pay the out-of-pocket costs of the other party if eventually they decide not to work together. The case is probably right on the black letter law, but nonsense on the larger context. And it's probably nonsense on the larger context because Reese is acting like a scumbag, right? Because he's hiding and he just makes it look bad. All right. Lucas.
Wasn't this just reversed though, so there's no summary judgment, so they still have to prove in court that there's damages?
Yeah, they still have to prove in court that there's damages. And by the way, we just back to what we said already, right? What are those damages going to be? Like, what are reliance costs if you're out of pocket in preparation? Good luck determining that. I am happy to punt that to the end of the class, but we will have to do that at the end of the course. Okay, let's move on. Restitution. All right, Nate, I told you I was going to do it. But I'm going to ask somebody else to talk to me here in a minute. What the hell does it mean that we are now in the land of equity? What does equity even mean? And I do not mean out there. I mean in here, what does equity mean? Does anybody know? Has anybody run into this yet? Okay, we're going to do it real fast. We're a little short on time, but listen up because you will use this in other classes. What you think is a court these days, and what you think is a judge these days, is actually a chimera. It is two legal entities smooshed together, pretending like they are one. After the plague, there were more wolves than men in England. And so in order for the king's justice to be carried out to the far-reaching communities, the judges were given the power of the king. They were given the power specifically over legal disputes. Now, when I say legal disputes, you think I mean everything that happens in this building. I do not. I mean half of the things that happen in this building. Specifically, when I say that a cause of action, and now I'm going to use a term of art, sounds at law. The hell does that mean? What it means is that it is one of these basic first-year causes of action, and that what you get is money damages. The problem is that money damages, the remedy that the judges were given at law in this linguistic context does not mean Joshua at law out there. It does not mean that I'm an attorney at law. It means at law is a way that a lawyer signifies to another lawyer. We are now speaking very nearly fluent legalese. When a lawyer says to another lawyer, this is an action that sounds at law, what they mean is this is an action for money damages. And contracts are actions at law. They are overwhelmingly, you get money damages. Now there's another thing that courts can do. And in contracts cases, because contracts are at law, they almost never do it. What's the thing that courts almost never do? Specific performance. Now, a specific performance is the one kind of legal outcome that happens in contracts. You will see these elsewhere all over the place. What specific performance is an injunction. An injunction is not damages at law. It is not money damages. It's not what's called legal damages. Instead, at law, so this is a remedy at equity. At equity. Because the problem was there were too many gaps where the courts couldn't make it right with money damages. Now, in contracts case, you can pretty much make any contracts breach right with enough money. And that's why we don't use injunctions here almost ever. Specific performance is the only example, and it is limited to land, Picassos, sole source of supply, sales of goods over $500. Those are your big categories that are going to be on the bar exam. Other than that, you're not getting it. Take a look at Judge Posner's response in NIPSCO, where he's just like, no, absolutely not. Eastern Airlines goes the other way, and it's like the only case I've seen do that. So there you go. All right. That's at equity. Do you have to pay money damages, or do you have to obey a court order to do something? That's equitable. Now, the problem here is that I've just made this very clear line to you, and immediately you go, yeah, but Your Honor, in a case at law, all the court's doing is ordering you to pay money. And all we're going to do in this case is ordering you to disgorge something that was not okay for you to keep. Restitution is an equitable remedy. It was provided in a different court system for hundreds of years, called the courts of chancery, or where a judge is not acting as a judge at law, they're acting under their powers at equity. And there, the rules are different. Let's try it. Can I enforce an unfair contract? All day long and twice on Sundays. Hi, have you looked out there? Unfair contracts everywhere, right? Now, can you bring an action for restitution where you, for example, let's try it. Because restitution is, the defendant has received a benefit which it is unfair that they should keep. Let's say that wherever you live, you wake up and it is 3 a.m. I don't sleep well. It is 3 a.m. and I am out in front of your apartment mowing your lawn. And then I send you a bill and you're like, what the hell is this? We don't have a contract. And I'm like, I know. But you have received a benefit that it is unfair for you to keep. Your response is, no, but give me more. It was a gift. The courts will make it into a gift, yeah.
No bargain for exchange.
no bargain for exchange, but I'm using restitution. I'm not using a bargain for exchange. I'm using restitution. Yeah. I didn't want that to happen. This is, by the way, legitimately a problem with Doug Rendelman and the restatement third of restitution and unjust enrichment. Unjust enrichment, you hearing it? Equity, unjust enrichment. The response, it wasn't fair, doesn't work in a court of law. It wasn't fair wins all day long in a court of equity. Now here's the final kicker. In pretty much every state, now the courts of equity and the courts of law have been merged. I don't think they actually merged them in Virginia until like the early 2000s. Like everybody, they're like 200 years behind everybody else. But you know, like they did just before I started teaching here. I was like, oh, that's a relief. I don't have to do this, like actually go to. But you can still see this, like the courts of chancery in Delaware. There are traces of this history all over the place. But what I need you to understand is that restitution, unjust enrichment, quantum Meruit is really a profoundly different set of legal arguments. Do we use them in the same cases? You better believe we use them in the same cases. But they come from a profoundly different place, and the responses are profoundly different. So to say, it would be unfair for you to keep the mowed lawn without paying for it, and the court's like, no, that would be perfectly fair because you never gave them the opportunity to object. Like you never even talked to them about it. This is the language they use. You officiously conferred a benefit. You don't just get to do drive-by restitution, right? That's just not a thing. Comes from equity. That's what equity is. All right, moving on. Then let's talk about Campbell. And Lauren, if you wouldn't mind setting up Campbell versus Tennessee Valley Authority for me, please.
So Campbell brings an action brought by in quantum Meruit against TVA, more specifically Earl Daniel, who is the director of the TVA Technical Library. He's saying that TVA came to Campbell and agreed to commission these rules to be done by Campbell. They agreed that this would be amount to $30,240. Campbell ends up doing the rules and delivering them to TVA. TVA sends them back to Campbell. Campbell sends them right back, and their rules stay in the library for about 2 months until Daniel destroys the 336 rules.
Great, love it. Which side do you want?
I'll take Campbell.
Okay, take Campbell. What's Campbell's major theory of the case?
He's saying that because he completed his side and produced the rolls and spent money producing those rolls, and TVA received those rolls, so TVA has this benefit that they unjustly have, they should give back what they took.
They should give back the value that they received, right? He doesn't want the film back. That's the beginning of the problem. Ben, what's the problem with this picture? So you've got the other side, you've got the very unattractive TVA. What's their view?
So the problem is not the fair market value of what he's giving us.
All right.
The problem is the benefit we would be receiving.
All right. So what benefit did you receive?
Well, I would argue we received no benefit.
You received no benefit. Why would you argue you received no benefit?
Campbell's argument is that the existence of the microfilm on the shelves of the library constitutes a benefit.
Yeah.
I would say that.
Have you seen a library post mobile phones, right? What's going on in that library? They actually give you facts on that.
What's going on in terms of?
Yeah, like how many people are watching these films?
Well, the problem is nobody would know that there was a benefit unless they actually used them.
Yeah, and
Only 3 people use them.
yeah. Yeah, and so like only 3 people used it, like nobody used it. So that's your benefit. Okay. You gonna let him get away? You gonna let him get away with that?
No. So having these sources in the library the value isn't that they're used, is that they're there and available to people. So the value isn't that it was used, it's that they're there in the first place.
Okay, and how are you going to determine the value? So we've now got 2 kinds of valuation. We've got value to TVA, which is what? 0 says TVA, although hold that thought. 0 says TVA, although hold that thought. And then what's the value you're positing? How would you measure the value of having an asset? Like, say, the value of my car.
I would say
right? That is what we agreed, that is what it would cost in the market to get it. Do you see these are two standards? Both of them appear in the restatement of restitution. Both of them are options. The value to the person who got the benefit, or the market value of obtaining the same resource. By the way, what split does that track that we've been talking about for a minute now? Yeah. Objective versus subjective. This is our basic split of objective versus subjective. One is the subjective price to TVA, the other is the market price to get it done. Now, I want to make one further point. We're moving quickly through the case. We'll wrap it up next time, but it's got a good reveal. All right, so how do we determine what the market value is? If we're going to go with your theory, right? And the court does go with your theory. If we're going to go with your theory, how do we determine the market value of getting these films?
They contract, or TVA contract someone else to ask them what they would pay for it, but we had already agreed to that price, and that's what we agreed to.
So you notice they go out and do research. What would somebody else pay for it? By the way, like, what would you pay for a survey of my property? Probably not the same, right? And then they go back to what the parties did agree to pay. What kind of valuation is that?
10,000.
But what kind of valuation? Like, where does that value come from? What the parties actually agreed to pay. We've got what it would cost. It's kind of objective, right? If you were looking at a catalog, right? If it said, services for creating microfiche films. But there is no catalog here. This is what I'm going to call a thin market. A thick market, you look in the catalog. A thin market, let's try it. What's the value of my house in a thick market? People are trading houses every day. All the time.
It's based on comps.
Yeah, it's based on comps, right? So what are the comps?
Well, all the other houses are.
Yeah, all the other houses in the area. Let's say there are no other houses in the area. In fact, no one has ever bought a house in this state ever before. It's completely new. Other than, it's been sold a couple times. My house has been sold a couple times before, but no one else has sold it. What would be the value of the house in a thin market? Whatever you're willing to pay for it, but the parties are fighting about it. Yep.
Well, I was going to say, if there's like not many other houses around, like it's just a limited market.
Yep.
So basically, yeah, whatever you're willing to pay for it.
Whatever you're willing to pay for it, which is basically what we're coming back to, Gene. Yeah.
I was gonna say what's sold for in the past.
What it's sold for in the past, what we're willing, what somebody, that's maybe the best we can do, what it sold for in the past. But also, if we have a thin market, overwhelmingly, we have our huge subjectivity problem. So she's trying to use an objective measure of contract damages. But the problem is it's fundamentally subjective again because it's a thin market. We're right back to what the parties actually negotiated. Hey, remind me, and so then, do you have a beginning of an inkling for how you win this case? Because this is looking rough. By the way, your client is a jerk, right? The Fred theory makes me angry.
Well, we're trying to avoid unjust enrichment. So in this case, you would try, if the benefit's less than the loss, and I think the benefit is significantly less, I mean, can we argue that $30,000 is what you're getting out of the mere presence?
Yeah, so this $30,000 is just a nonsense. It's clearly not true. What's your best argument for $30,000? That's what you agreed to. Does anybody see where I'm going with this? What kind of argument is that's the price you agreed to? Yeah, that's a? It's a failed contract. Why is it a failed? They had do you think he went to work without a contract? No, there was a contract. What was the problem with the contract? It's the same guy as always, Lauren? Yeah, it was oral? Unauthorized, right? It's the Fred problem. Could it be oral? Why is it not a problem that it was oral and not in writing? You need to know this because it's going to be on the bar, y'all. It will be all over the bar. That's a formalization issue. When do we need assigned writing? You haven't studied it yet, but I've said it enough times. You need it for land, Picasso's, that's land or unique movable goods, goods over $500, sole source of supply under the Uniform Commercial Code. Otherwise, you do not get it. See NIPSCO, period. You do not get it. Okay? So, That is, we're in a very different specific control world here. You need the writing for contracts over a year. I guess contracts over a year is another one. Sorry, I got that wrong. You need it for land. I was giving you specific performance. I screwed up. You need a writing for land, contracts which by their terms cannot be done in under a year, contracts to stand surety for the debt of another if I promise to pay your debts, or contracts in anticipation of marriage, and then contracts for the sale of goods, movable goods over $500. That is correct. Sorry, I got that wrong. Wanted to make sure I got that correction in right away. All right, so what we're saying here then is this is another failed contracts case. They had a contract, they couldn't enforce the contract. Anybody notice, we're at our last minute, anybody notice what the measure of damages turns out to be in the case? The contract measure of damages. This case is what I mean when I say we can kick restitution and unjust enrichment out of the contracts game, but they don't stay out. They just keep coming right back in. This is a restitution end run around a defense that the court considers largely bullcrap, but has to follow. The defense is Fred didn't have authority. The court's like, this is nonsense. The court says, what's my measure of damages? It's the objective measure. What does it take to get it on the market? Hey, thin market. What's the only measure we've got of the damages? Darn it, it's that pesky contract that I couldn't enforce. You see what's going on. Thanks very much, folks. We'll pick this up